Welcome to Bovine Banter with the Penn State Extension Dairy Team. My name is Kasey Hower, and I'm an educator based in Berks County, Pennsylvania. Today, I'm excited to welcome Ed Crow and Jamie Kopco from the Penn State Extension Pesticide Education Team. On this season of the podcast, we will be covering farm safety, and today we are specifically going to focus on chemical safety. Thanks for being with us today, Ed and Jamie. And just to get us started, can you please introduce yourself and tell us a little more about your background?
My name is Ed Crow, and I'm an educator, as Casey said, with the pesticide education program. And my primary specialty is pesticide, or I should say regulations. And I'm more of a regulatory specialist. So I've been with the pesticide education program now for a little over 10 years. And prior to that, I worked for the Maryland Department of Agriculture with the pesticide regulations section. And there I was started out my career as a field inspector doing pesticide inspections and regulation, and then moved into the office and oversaw the licensing and certification for pesticide applicators in Maryland. And then the opportunity came up to come to work for Penn State.
And I'm on the same team as Ed, the pesticide safety education team. And I'm an entomologist, and I started off studying insect ecology and then pivoted from that to structural pest control. So I was the technical director for a pest control company that dealt with like cockroaches and bed bugs and mice and rats and all that stuff. And then pivoted to working for Penn State. And when I came to Penn State, I also joined the Army Reserves. So I got to pick up being a medical entomologist in a preventive medicine unit with the Army Reserves. And medical entomology kind of overlaps with veterinary entomology, so that's kind of my connection here is I'm at least familiar with like parasites and how to manage them.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, cool. I'm glad to have you both on today. We know that a wide variety of chemicals are used in order to keep facilities and equipment clean and animals healthy on dairy farms. This may include cleaners and solvents, pesticides, fuels, veterinary chemicals, as Jamie mentioned. Any of them could pose potential health risks to dairy farmer owners and workers. From your perspective, what should farmers consider when coming up with a plan for safely handling some of these different chemicals on their farms?
I would say first and foremost, it's always read the label because other than your petroleum products, about any other product they'll be using should have a label attached to that particular product. And on that, it'll have instructions on how to properly use that product for both controlling or doing what it's intended to do, plus protecting themselves.
Mhm.
And really, I would second that. In our field, just telling people to read and follow the label is kind of our bread and butter statement. And all of the information on there exists to make the product work and work safely. So if you're following the label instructions, that is the absolute best precaution you can take.
Okay. Yeah, I've actually received some calls here and there from farmers asking if they can use things off label, I guess. So what would be your advice if they have a question like that? Like, where can they go to maybe get some of that extra advice? Would they come to you? Would they go to someone else? What would you advise?
Or at least for pesticides, you legally can't go off label for most uses. There's a few exemptions to that provision where the specific pest doesn't have to be on the label or a specific application method could be used unless it's specifically prohibited by the label. But otherwise, the like we just said, the labels, the laws, the adage is always used with pesticides. And for other chemicals, I don't know of a specific agency to refer somebody to that, but those products, they're not registered and they don't have the label doesn't have the same teeth as what pesticides do. So I'm not positive, but I don't think there would be any consequences with that other than they might end up having some problems if they aren't following those label directions.
And two things that I would add. First is sometimes the label instructions can be a little bit vague. So if you're just looking for clarification on the label instructions, oftentimes you can reach out to the product manufacturer. They went through the whole registration process, so they can often give insights on how you should interpret the wording, even if the wording is a little bit weird on the label itself. So that wouldn't allow going off label, but that could at least clarify what is off label and what is on label. And kind of what Ed said, sometimes the labels will also have this list of prohibited acts, and if there's something you want to do that the label just doesn't mention at all, then it's kind of a work at your own risk. And the labels come from science. Like there's a lot of investigation into these products that's used to write the label. And the instructions are given based on the product will work and not cause unreasonable harm or hazards if you follow the instructions. So if you do go off label on top of violating the law, this is like you're taking your fate in your own hands. It may not work, it might backfire or cause more harm, or you might injure yourself.
Just to
Okay.
follow up with what Jamie said, most of the labels, the manufacturers have an 800 number on there that you can contact them.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that kind of leads into my next question. You said the labels are most important, but what are some of the other most common mistakes you might see when it comes to handling some chemicals on farm properly?
One I would say would be just protecting themselves as an applicator. And a lot of the chemical products, not just the pesticides, will have information on there about potential routes of exposure. Typically, be skin contact, dermal exposure, or flashing into the eyes when handling concentrated products. One comes to mind would be sodium hypochlorite, which is very caustic to both the skin and the eyes. And a lot of labels, not just pesticide products, will have requirements on there to wear gloves or eye protection. So just by following personal protective equipment is required by the label goes a long way to protect the applicator to exposures. And just by wearing a pair of gloves, somebody can cut down on 99% of their exposure to the chemical. There's been studies done with pesticides that show that about 97% of the exposure is to the skin, and 85% of that is to hands and forearms. So just by wearing gloves, you can go a long way of reducing exposure. Then probably another, well, with gloves, it's important to pick a type of glove that's going to offer protection to chemicals. And we always recommend a nitrile glove. It's a material that's going to be protect you against most of the petroleum products that are going to be used, most of the agricultural chemicals and pesticides. So a good pair of nitrile gloves is about $6, and they provides very good protection for chemicals. And usually we recommend that you get a thicker glove for most situations, something that's about 14 mils thick.
Okay.
And Ed really did a wonderful job of covering all of that. I think one other potential route of exposure that I would add is respiratory exposure, and this is much more minor and not as common of an issue than dermal. But in general, if you're using a chemical and you can smell it, that's a hint that it is evaporating and giving off vapors that you are then breathing in. And if you're working with something like that, just do your best to do so in a well-ventilated space. Or if you must be in a poorly ventilated space, wear some sort of respiratory protection. Another thing that I would add is oftentimes these exposures can kind of add up. I've seen where like pest control technicians will say, oh, this product, the label indicates it has a caution signal word, which suggests low acute toxicity. So like low toxicity right now. So I'm not going to worry about the exposure. And they cut corners on wearing PPE, and they get these repeated exposures to chemicals that they're using every single day. And I say that caution signal word tells you that you're not going to drop dead from an exposure right now, but it doesn't say that it is safe to expose yourself to this product day in and day out, Monday through Friday for years on end. This is potentially going to add up and affect your body.
Okay.
So keep that in mind that there are potential long-term effects. So even if you cut corners once and it doesn't blow up in your face, you should still try to wear the PPE every single time because those effects can add up over time.
Yeah. Are there any particular like chemicals? I mean, I know there's a wide variety that dairy farms use from teat dips to udder washes to the washes for their pipelines and acids, and then, your chemicals to control pests and things like that. Are there any particular chemicals or active ingredients that they should be extra aware of or extra cautious with handling?
I would say, I mean, like, so it goes back to the signal word, especially anything would have a danger on the label, that those are going to take extra precautions, especially for wearing personal protective equipment because of the levels of acute toxicity that are there and the exposures. Like I said, with sodium hypochlorite would be one that has a danger associated with it. So there you want to take the precautions with eye protection and gloves, so especially when you're handling the concentrates.
And I just want to back up. We have mentioned signal words a couple of times. There are four different signal words that you might see on a label. Caution indicates the lowest toxicity. Warning is a little bit higher toxicity. Danger is a severe skin or eye irritant. And danger poison with a skull and crossbones is the highest toxicity of all.
Okay.
So you can interpret those, and if you see caution on a label, that tells you, use caution. This isn't completely non-toxic, but it's relatively low toxicity. And I would absolutely agree with Ed. If you see danger or danger poison with a skull and crossbones, you should really treat those products with serious respect because they can do a lot of harm. But I've also seen people be very, very diligent with their danger and danger poison products and then get very, very lax with their caution products. And another adage we have is that your total hazard from a chemical is connected to your exposure and its toxicity. Well, if you have no exposure to a highly toxic chemical, then you're not in danger from it. If you have frequent, repeated, small exposures to these lower toxicity products, then the lower toxicity stuff might pose a greater hazard because you are exposing yourself. So, yes, there are some products that you want to be really, really careful with, but if it has a signal word on it, treat it with some respect and follow those PPE recommendations and just handle it carefully.
Yeah. Would you be able to talk a little bit more about some of the health risks that could be associated with mishandling chemicals on the farm?
Ed, do you want me to dive in on this one
Yeah, I was
first?
gonna say, I think I'll defer to Jamie on that
Okay.
one. I'm not a toxicologist, but I mean, there's
So
always health risk associated with any type of chemical that you're using.
I'm also not a toxicologist, but like some of the products that you mentioned are common on farms are these disinfectants that would be run through equipment, like milking machines. Oftentimes, these disinfectants are designed to kill any living cell that they come in contact with. And whether that's some E. coli bacteria that are starting to colonize in the hosing lines of a milking machine, or it's the skin of your eyes, or like the cells of your eyes, or the cells of your skin, they're going to do the same thing. They're going to kill whatever cell they come in contact with. So oftentimes those disinfectants can just really mess up your skin or mess up your eyes or whatever part of your body they contact. They just immediately like cause chemical burns or otherwise kill those cells, which obviously is bad. You don't want to kill your cells. You're
Mhm.
made of them. What I do know more about is insecticides because I am an entomologist who does pest management, and a lot of insecticides affect the nervous system. So if you're exposed to those, then they're going to affect your nervous system. Fortunately, there are some pretty big differences between humans and insects in terms of the exact molecular ways that the nervous system works and in terms of how we can detoxify different compounds. So some examples are organophosphates and carbamates. They actually affect a part of the nervous system that's identical in humans and in insects. So if you're exposed to those products, they're going to do the exact same thing to you that they would do to a cockroach or a fly or some other insect. By comparison, we have pyrethroids that are really good at killing insects and they affect the nervous system, but they affect a part of the nervous system that's a little different in us. So they don't bind as well, and we produce enzymes that break them down very quickly. So if you're using pyrethroid products and you are exposed to them, like I can actually speak from experience. If you get pyrethroids on your skin, it feels similar to getting a sunburn. So you'll get some skin irritation. It can be sort of tingly and tender, but your body breaks those chemicals down usually within a few hours or maybe a day or two. So at least a minor exposure, mildly annoying, and then it goes away.
Hmm.
But that's just one specific class of insecticide, where other insecticides could be much nastier.
Okay.
Had mentioned about potential problems that growers may have. There's another area besides protecting themselves I do want to stress and mention to the audience, and that's storing the products. Is you always want to make sure that they're being stored in a good type of container. A lot of times, if there might be a puncture or something, people may transfer the product into another container. If they mix too much, they'll store it. And you want to make sure they aren't storing products in a food or beverage container. We see that all too often with pesticides, where somebody may store some diluted product in a soda bottle or another type of milk jug, and they're not identified. And then somebody comes along, doesn't know what's in it, and either they drink it or they use it for something else, and it causes a lot of problems. So it's very important that any chemical stored in a properly labeled container and not something that's a food and beverage container. And with pesticides, a lot of labels specifically prohibit the storage of that product in a food or beverage container. So if it's in something other than the original container, always make sure it's identified. Put what the chemical name is on that. For pesticides, it would be called the trade name, which is how it's marketed. And for pesticides, it's required to have the active ingredient, which is the product that's in the chemical is going to do what it's intended to do, percent of that product, and then the signal word on that container so somebody knows what's in there, because there have been a lot of incidents, especially with children not knowing what's in there and getting a hold of those products, and they're not properly identified.
And
Okay.
and speaking of children, their minds do work in mysterious ways and they get into stuff you wouldn't expect them to. So wherever you store all of these products should be as secure as possible. If there are kids around, make sure that they're aware, like this is dangerous. We have you locked out of it for a reason, so don't try to get in. Don't be, dodgy or suspicious about why you're not letting them in, because that'll just make them more curious. Just tell them, hey, there are chemicals here that are dangerous if you handle them. When you're older and you know what you're doing, then you can handle them, but now you're too young. So just make sure that you're storing things properly. And another potential hazard when it comes to oral exposure, so actually eating or drinking a pesticide, is having food or beverages around where you store your chemicals. So in addition to not moving the chemicals into food or beverage containers, do not have food or beverages in the areas where you're handling the chemicals or storing them. It's just very easy to get things mixed up if you mix them anyway.
Okay. So if someone was accidentally exposed or is, I guess, seeing some side effects of overexposure, besides like seeking medical advice or calling 911, who else should they maybe contact? Or is there anyone else that they should contact in that case, I guess?
First response or immediate response, most of the product labels will have basic first aid information on there, what to do for the immediate exposure. So that's always the first place to go to try to rectify the problem as quickly as possible. And if it's something that's swallowed, there's important to check those labels out, because it's a lot of products are going to cause more harm if vomiting is induced versus not doing anything. And the labels will specifically reference that.
Okay.
The general theme of first aid for a chemical exposure is to stop the exposure. So if you got a chemical on your skin, wash it off. If you got a chemical in your mouth, rinse your mouth out. If you got a chemical in your eyes, rinse your eyes out. Just the overall goal is stop the exposure so that you don't have more of that chemical getting into your body from however you were exposed.
Okay. Kind of going back to Ed mentioning chemicals in mislabeled containers. If farmers come across that, what should they do, or is there a place that they can go to dispose of chemicals properly?
That's always been a tough question to deal with. As far as pesticides go, the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture does offer a disposal program for pesticide products. It rotates throughout the state. They have a select counties every year, and then like I said, it rotates. I forget what the cycle is, but they can get information regarding that called the Chem Sweep program, going to the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture. I said that's specifically for pesticides. Other chemicals is going to vary depending on the county. It's county to county, but several counties do offer household hazardous waste disposal days. So the best bet would be to contact their county hazardous waste program to see what is available.
Okay.
The best way to really manage this before you get to that point is to figure out how much of a product you'll actually need and just get a realistic amount and use it up. So in a best case scenario, you won't need to be dealing with the hazardous waste disposal. You just get the right amount of all the stuff you need and you consume it all.
Hmm.
But then, people miscalculate all the time or things change, and that's when the resources that Ed mentioned come into play.
Gotcha. Yeah. No, that makes sense. I guess, because we've covered a couple different things. Overall, what would be your biggest takeaways for our listeners?
I guess go back to the first thing we talked about, read the label.
I would second that reading and following the label is the biggest takeaway that I would want people to take. And maybe a second would be just use some common sense and try to think about where the chemicals you're going are ending up and what they could do when they get there.
Yeah, just like Jamie said, use common sense and then protect yourself.
Yep. Wearing PPE, definitely
Yep.
important. Thank you, Jamie and Ed, for taking the time to talk with us today. And thank you to all of our listeners. If you have any questions regarding today's episode, please email me at kzm175@psu.edu. And don't forget to tune in for the next episode of the Bovine Banter podcast, where fellow educator Ginger Fenton will be interviewing Dr. Florence Beacott on safety and children on the farm.